On today's show, Houston Rockets midseason review, part 1, grades for Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr, Cam Whitmore, and Ime Udoka, what we've learned so far this season, biggest surprises, and so much more. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. We want your thoughts, your grades for these individual performances of the Houston Rockets, or just do a drive-by, say Go Rockets in the comments. It helps us out a ton. Also, be sure to subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now for part 1 of our Houston Rockets mid-season review is none other than the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. You can't find him on TikTok, not anymore. TikTok is all banned. All right, Ben, we are now officially at the halfway point of this Houston Rockets season. 41 games in, they're sitting at 28 and 13. So we're going to dive in and take a look at some of the individual performances of the young core members to this point in the season, handing out some letter grades, as well as Ime Udoka himself. And then we'll get into some big questions like what we've learned about this Rockets team so far this season, the biggest surprises. We'll focus on those here in today's episode. We'll also be tackling in our next episode, we'll get into the MVP through the halfway point of the season, the most improved player through this point in the season, and kind of our expectations and predictions for how the second half of this season will play out. In this episode, we're focusing on Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr, Cam Whitmore, and Ime Udoka. Our next episode, we're going to be tackling Alperen, Sengun, Tari, Eason, Thompson, and Reed Shepherd as far as the individual grades go. So let's start things off with Jalen Green, because Jalen's post-All-Star break self is here a little bit early, and it's incredible, right? January Jalen is in full effect, and when you look at the body of work for Jalen Green this season, right, he started things off incredibly strong, right? Had the first, the 6-7 games that looked amazing, then fell into that rut in November, right, where he had that early shooting slump, and a lot of people were concerned, oh man, all right, was March like a fake run? Was it his Linsanity tour, all that stuff? And then post-Thanksgiving, or since Thanksgiving Eve, basically, Jalen Green's numbers have been pretty sensational. And especially now in the calendar year of 2025, he's been playing like an absolute star level player. What do you make of this recent run that Jalen's been on?
Yeah, it's impressive. I would give him a B+ grade for the year, because you can't toss out what happened in November when he slumped. But I would say the overall body of work, he's now averaging about 22 points per game. True shooting is almost at 57 for the season. Even if we concede that some of what's happened in January is probably a hot stretch analogous to March, we said going into this season that it wasn't just March. If you looked at the second half of last year, basically the last 40 games, he was right at about 21, 22 points per game on 56% true shooting. And now he's at that, or actually a little bit above, almost at 57% true shooting. And he's playing nearly 35 minutes per game. So you can tell Ime Udoka trusts him on the defensive end of the floor as well. He's not getting yanked in these closing lineups. So the defense is there. The efficiency is better. He's the leading scorer on the number 2 team in the Western Conference, on pace to win 58 games. So there's nothing empty calorie about the numbers. He's doing it on a team that wins. With all of that, I think you can't give him an A because the slump was there. I think an A would be if he was a sustained star level player for the entire season, but he's done enough now that I think a B+ is completely fair. He's doing it on a winning team, and he's showing that what we saw over the last 40 games of last year is in fact the real Jalen Green. And perhaps he's better than that. Certainly the performance since Thanksgiving Eve, the last 6 to 8 weeks, would suggest that, but I want to see a larger sample before I buy in on him being at that, Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell tier. But I do think we can celebrate right now that the last 40 games of last year are legitimate. He is a good starter on a very good team. And that's enough for me to say, at a bare minimum, let's give him a B+.
No, absolutely. In fact, we know, just for anybody tuning in for the first time, or if it's been a while since you've listened to one of our, great report card kind of episodes, we don't cross-check what we're going to grade before we come into these episodes. Ben does his blind. I do mine blind. I've got him right here on my phone, though. Jalen Green, B+. I've got him as a B+ as well. I think that I'm buying into him really like making the leap, right? You're seeing the processing, you're seeing his ability to handle some of what defenses are throwing at him, some of what they were throwing at him earlier this season. Now, some of that is just, he's not slumping, right? The ball is going in the basket. Sometimes it's just that simple. But even just his confidence level, Ime talked about it after the win against the Portland Trailblazers, where he's just playing with so much more confidence right now. His decision-making is way better than it ever has been at any point in his career. The way that he's handling blitzes and traps, the way that he's making reads and getting the ball to his teammates, or making decisions based on, okay, this defender's going under the screen, so I'm going to shoot, or they're playing up on me, so I'm going to drive. And even some of the ways in which he's doing things that we haven't seen before. He had that drive at the end of the Kings game when the Rockets went for the super quick 2-for-1 at the end, the layup, where he literally just like drove and exploded and elevated over the entire Kings defense, right? It really feels like he's starting to tap into that like 99th percentile athleticism, where before he would very much rely on his speed, his quickness, his explosiveness, able to get past his defender, but then he would get met at the rim and get stuffed or blocked, or he'd be playing oftentimes below the rim, right? Going with some of those corkscrew layups, that kind of thing. Now it really feels like he's playing above the rim a lot more consistently. He's going up for these posters where he's challenging bigs right at the rim, getting sent to the foul line, playing through contact at the cup, and he's shooting almost 70% at the rim this season. That's been the biggest thing for him, is unlocking better efficiency at the rim. And then when you couple that with his increased shooting from the perimeter, his increased efficiency from the perimeter, look, I don't expect him to be, to have the insane shooting that he's had here in January. I don't expect that to hold. The numbers are going to regress at some point, but as long as they don't regress, and as long as he doesn't go back to, stretches where he's shooting sub 30%, whatever, from three, as long as he stays in the median outcome range of like 35-36%, coupled with the efficiency at the rim, the downhill scoring gravity, and the improved decision-making and playmaking ability, then this is a legitimate all-star caliber Jalen Green that we're talking about, which is exactly what the Rockets hoped when they drafted him number 2 overall.
Well, and you can go back to the Memphis game last Monday. The game winner he had was going to the rim and finishing through a big man that went vertical. There was some contact. He had to, show some touch, some finesse, and also strength to absorb the contact. And he was able to do all of it in one package. And that's where Jalen Green is so important to this team. It's not a shot at Alperen Sengun. You can look at Nikola Jokic in Denver. That's a top 1% of that archetype of a playmaking big man. And yet Jamal Murray is often the one that's landing the plane late in a close game. And so to see what we've seen since the calendar has turned to January, and Jalen making plays down the stretch in the half court against good teams, both of the Memphis games in the final 5 minutes, we saw what he did against the Lakers. I know when this run started, really since Thanksgiving Eve, there were a lot of people early on that said, well, Jalen's doing it against lesser teams. Yeah, that's how it started. But I think a lot of it for Jalen was building confidence, building the right habits. We've seen this at times over really his first 4 seasons in the NBA. He's always finished better than he started. And I think part of it, we often simplify it on this pod and say he's a rhythm player. I think that's part of it, but it's also building confidence. It's building a routine. And as a season goes along, he gets into, better patterns of how to use his athleticism, because a lot of it comes down to feel. Look, he's way more athletic. He has way more burst than other guys on the court. It's just how to channel that in the right way and to overcome the challenges of physicality and how teams are defending him. And sometimes it takes him a few months to really unlock. That's what it's felt like his first 3 years. This year, he had the hot start to the year, but I think a lot of that was just shooting. And then he slumped in November. But it felt like after about the 1 month mark, after the calendar turned to Thanksgiving, you could see the light bulb starting to come on. He picked up his performance against the lesser teams. And really, ever since about the middle of December, it's been against pretty much everybody. And so I'm optimistic that it will hold. I mean, we saw last year, once it started to take off, by and large, he sustained it for the remainder of the season. There were a few peaks and valleys. There always are going to be that for guards. But I just think it's so important for this Rockets team. And that's why it's only appropriate that we start this series with Jalen. Because look, as good as Alperen Sengun is, you're going to need a perimeter scorer to get you to the finish line. That's why we've talked so much about if it doesn't work out with Jalen, the Rockets making a big trade for someone who can be that guy. But plan A is not making a trade. Plan A is Jalen Green. And to his credit, for the last 4 to 8 weeks, he's been that guy. Kudos to him. B+ for the season, but really A to A+ for the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Jalen Green has absolutely been that dude recently for the Houston Rockets, and hopefully it keeps up as the season progresses. So B+ for Jalen Green. What do you think of our grade for Jalen? What would you grade Jalen Green? Coming up, we're going to get into Jabari Smith Jr., Cam Whitmore, Ime Udoka, as well as what else we've learned about the Houston Rockets this season, biggest surprises, and more. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate College Basketball. I want to take a moment to introduce you to a brand new mobile game that I'm actually really excited about, Ultimate College Basketball HC. If you've ever dreamed about being a college basketball head coach, this is your chance to step into those shoes. In Ultimate College Basketball HC, you control every detail of your program, from recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps, handling NIL deals, and managing scholarships. It's all in the palm of your hands. And when it comes to game time, you get to draw up offensive plays and set your strategy. The way you play won't just affect the current season, it will shape the future of your school's basketball program. It's a game that lets you feel the full weight and responsibility of what it means to be a head coach and lead your team to glory. Here's a special offer for Locked On Rockets listeners. Use promo code LOCKEDONCBB, all caps, inside the game store to get a free boost for your program. It's the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. Download Ultimate College Basketball HC. Just visit ultimate-cbb.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. Look, I love going to live events. It's the absolute best, whether it's going to a basketball game or a concert or the theater or a comedy club. One of my favorite memories was going to a concert last year, and I bought the tickets on Game Time, actually. The energy, the excitement, it was truly unforgettable. Now Game Time's made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. The feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different tickets. Earlier this month, I was actually looking for some Rockets tickets near the end of the month, trying to go with some friends, and I was using the Game Time app, and it made it so easy. With Game Time Picks, I was able to find amazing deals, and I could even see the view from my seat before buying. The super deal was really impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost upfront. They are fully transparent, no surprise fees at checkout, so take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, let's go ahead with or continue with our grading series here. Let's dive into Jabari Smith Jr. Currently, unfortunately sidelined with the weird, weird hand injury sustained during Rockets shoot around, which is still one of the wildest injuries ever. But Jabari's body of work this season, a little similar to Jalen, right? Started off, kind of struggling, at one point was shooting, 15% on wide open catch and shoot threes, which is that is unsustainable. That's bench-worthy territory for an NBA level starter in the type of role that Jabari Smith Jr. is in as a 3-and-D wing, right? He was 3-and-D without the three for a good chunk of this season, but then he turned it around. He found his shooting stroke and he started trending upwards to the point where before being sidelined, he was the Rockets' second best three-point shooter in the actual consistent rotation, because Aaron Holiday hadn't truly broken into the rotation at that point, supplanting Reed Shepherd. So it was basically Dillon Brooks is the Rockets' best three-point shooter, and then Jabari Smith Jr. right there hovering around league average after being so abysmal starting the year. What do you give Jabari Smith Jr. as far as his grade for this season to this point?
I would give him a B-. It might seem a little bit harsh, but it's a combination of two things. The three-point shooting is solid, but at about 35.5%. He can be better than that based on his archetype, based on the types of open looks he's getting playing alongside top shelf playmakers like Alperen, Sengun, like Jalen Green since Thanksgiving Eve. I think Jabari is capable, and I think he thinks he is as well, of shooting in the 38 to 40% range, being a clearly above average shooter. He's been capable the last 2 years. I wouldn't say he's been clearly above average, and so that's why I dock him a little bit. And I also look at the offense since he got hurt. The Rockets have the number one offense in the entire NBA in January, with Ime Thompson largely starting at power forward. And so I think that shows you some of the limitations that have been there when it's been Jabari at that slot because, I mean, we all know Jabari is not the athlete or the playmaker that Ime is. Now, he's a much better shooter, but he is not a good enough shooter to where the threes he's making or the gravity that he provides when he's on the court is making you the level of offense that they've been over the last 3 weeks. Now, you can certainly argue that if Jabari played alongside the version of Jalen that we've seen this month, maybe the Rockets would have better offensive ratings, but you could also make the reverse argument that maybe Jalen is playing at this level in part because of having Ime Thompson at the 4 spot. And so I just think overall, it hasn't been a bad year for Jabari, but when you look at the shooting, that's okay, pretty good, but not great. And you look at how the offense has taken a clear, jump since Jabari went out, and I think B or B minus is probably the optimal grade here.
I've got him at a B, and I'm actually going to go with the inverse point that you made. The Rockets have been the number one offense since January, but they've also fallen to 19th defensively.
And the metrics do like him on that side. Yes,
exactly. And I do think that defensively, this Rockets team misses Jabari, right? They miss having the ability to throw him out there as the small ball 5. They miss the versatility that he brings. They miss him being the only plus size defender that they have at any of their 5 starting positions. Now maybe, Ime Thompson is a different beast, right? He's just a different archetype completely. But I do think for some of those reasons, and the other biggest thing to me, and where I even though Jabari was, kind of stagnating and staying, at league average, whatever, acceptable percentage from 3, his improvement as a rim protector this season has been sensational, right? His ability to be that weak side shot blocker, rotating over, completely swatting guys out of bounds. That has been a revelation this season. And I don't know if Jabari will ever truly be like an Evan Mobley level rim protector, but for him to get to the level that he's been at this season and to hopefully continue to improve in that facet of his game, that's exactly the type of player that you do want flanking Alperen Sengun defensively. And maybe the eventual vision for this Houston Rockets front court is a trio of Alperen Sengun, Ime Thompson, and then eventually, once Dillon Brooks is phased out, then Jabari Smith Jr. in that ultimate and final spot. Maybe he doesn't ever regain his starting spot this season because Ime Thompson is just too good in this role currently. But Jabari has been an integral part of the Rockets' success, and for that, I give him a B. Let's go to our next guy up here, Cam Whitmore, who was maybe a bit disgruntled to start the season with his role. We've talked at length about Cam Whitmore on this podcast and some of the, quote unquote drama surrounding him or lack thereof. But I think with Cam, sent to the G League, was expected to started the season really rough around the edges, couldn't shoot the ball, and was also, looked like he had kind of lost some of the focus on the defensive side of the court, right? Didn't really look ready to maintain the intensity and the commitment to the defensive side of things that Ime Udoka demands out of his players. Was sent to the G League, was given the chance to kind of, get back into an offensive rhythm, as well as refining and locking back in on those defensive principles that he needs to be able to be a staple part of the rotation. And then he came back and he's been an absolute necessity and impact player since coming back. He's really rounding into a very, very solid 6th man of the year type not 6th man of the year candidate, but just an overall 6th man, right? His spark off the bench is, cannot be overstated. His offensive, impact, the ability that he has to come in and immediately get hot and change the overall feel of a game, especially on the offensive side of the court where the Rockets have kind of struggled at times this season. He's been really important to this team.
Yeah, and I think he's been part of why the Rockets have been better offensively but worse defensively in January. Some of it comes down to personnel. I thought the points you made on Jabari are fair, but I think it's more when the Rockets are at their best defensively, you need 2 of the 3 at least of Ime Thompson, Tari, Eason, and Jabari Smith Jr. on the floor. When you have at least 2 of your 5 from that trio, you can't help but be a good defensive team. Lately, Ime has been the only one of those 3 because it hasn't just. I just want to point out the absolute shade to one Sir Dillon Brooks. How dare you exclude him? I'm just messing with you. No. That's true. But Dillon, of course, we're not talking about the veterans on this episode. But no, Dillon said himself early in the year when his metrics were off the charts, he actually said that those 3 guys are more talented than I am. Just talking about, the length, the athleticism, how dynamic they can be. And so I think they also have some young legs. And so I think lately having only one of those 3 with not just Jabari, but Tari as well, being out, that's really limited what the Rockets can do defensively. And they've had no choice but to play Cam Whitmore more minutes to sort of fill in that gap. And so they've been a better offensive team during those minutes, but a lesser defensive team. And I think that's largely to be expected. I would give Cam a B-. I think that might seem a little too rosy for a guy who didn't play in the NBA for the first half of this sample and clearly did not earn the trust of the coaching staff, and there were some things he needed to work on. But I think in the minutes that he's gotten, other than the very slow start to the year, which, that was a ridiculously small sample and everybody was healthy and the team was so deep, we knew somebody was going to be the odd man out. For the most part, when Cam has gotten opportunities, he's taken advantage of them. Not enough to where you'd give him an A or anything close to that. And I think you have to dock him a little bit for, forcing or, pushing the coaching staff to send him to the G League, but he's been good enough since coming back and filling the minutes that had previously gone to guys like Tari and Jabari that I would give him a B-.
I've got him at C+, and again, I think he's done a ton with the minutes that he's been given, and the biggest thing to me is he's finding other ways to be impactful. The double-digit rebounding games have been amazing. He's had some good defensive moments, although there are some lapses, and he's still prone to making some bad decisions on that side of the court. But the effort and the consistency is getting better on that side, and then even the playmaking, right? Even his ability to not be so tunnel visioned, right? He's realizing, hey, if I dish the ball to my teammates, I can use my scoring gravity to make life easier for my teammates, and that's been a nice little development from Cam Whitmore as well. So I give him a C+, but that's like a quick C+. That's from like an F getting demoted to the G League and then skyrocketing to a C+, like him cramming for his midterm papers at the last second. All right. Last grade that we have before we move on to some of the big questions and topics from this season. Ime Udoka. What you got for Ime, Ben?
Easy. A+. This is a 28-13 team that's on pace to win 56 games. The over-under was 43.5. They went 41-41 last year. Not saying that it's been perfect, not saying that there's no questions you can raise, but when you look at the big picture, the macro, how can you look at a Rockets team that's number 2 in the West on pace to go 56-26, 30 games above 500, and not give an A+ to the overall leadership of this team?
Yeah, I think Ime Udoka gets an A++ in my book just for this quote alone.
Get some glasses, open your eyes.
Calling out the officials earlier this season. Look, Ime has been absolutely fantastic, and the really kind of only downside here is that as it currently stands, as far as coach of the year favorites, there are so many strong coaches in this year's NBA. Kenny Atkinson, obviously with the Cleveland Cavaliers, Jamal Mosley with the Magic sustaining injuries to both Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner and still staying near the top of the Eastern Conference. Taylor Jenkins with the renewed and new look Memphis Grizzlies. They still got their big three of Ja, Desmond Bane, and Triple J, but starting literally 2 rookies and being also atop the Western Conference, right? They're doing incredible stuff over in Memphis. And then Ime Udoka is currently 4th in Coach of the Year odds, or 4th best odds to win Coach of the Year. So it sucks that he's having such an incredible season. And like any other year in the NBA, he'd be like the shoe-in favorite to win the award, with the Rockets jumping from, missing the play-in to being a top, 2nd in the West if they sustain that. But yeah, he's been incredible. I agree wholeheartedly with you. A+ for Ime Udoka. He's been incredible. What more can you ask for from this guy? He's really been, and I will maintain this point, Ime Udoka has been more important than any singular player or piece of this Houston Rockets rebuild. Bringing Ime Udoka in, credit to the Houston Rockets organization, credit to the Fertittas, credit to Patrick, Rafael, everybody involved in that decision. Bringing Ime Udoka here helped turn this Houston Rockets organization around and get back to playing winning basketball. All right. Coming up, what have we learned about this Houston Rockets team this season? What have been the biggest surprises and more? We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by OpenPhone. Look, running a small business means you're wearing a lot of different hats. Your personal phone becomes your business phone, and before you know it, you're juggling customer calls day and night. As your team grows, it becomes impossible to manage everything with just your personal number. That's where OpenPhone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. For just $15 a month, the cost of a few cups of coffee, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It also uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you'll have a rundown of your calls and action items the second that you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customer, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's OpenPhone, OPENPHONE.com/lockedonnba for 20% off of 6 months. OpenPhone.com/lockedonnba. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, Ben, what have we learned? What do you think we've learned about this Houston Rockets team so far this season?
I mean, the obvious would be that this team is ahead of schedule.
That kind of goes hand in hand with biggest surprises, right? Like I think if you had told anybody that this team would be number 2 in the Western Conference, only trailing the OKC Thunder, sitting at 28-13, 41 games through the season, your jaw would hit the floor, right? You would think that the Rockets would have, that Jalen Green would be playing like a superstar, which to his credit, he has been playing like a superstar in the month of January.
What I'll say my biggest takeaway is the Rockets have a star right now in Ime Thompson, and that's something that I did not know going into this year would be the case, at least not in year 2. I think Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun have been good players. I would grade them both in the B+ range, but we know the strengths.
Whoa, spoilers. That's next episode.
I know.
Stop that.
But I'm just saying we sort of knew what they were going into the year. And I think we also knew what the culture guys, Fred and Dillon, and you can tie Ime Udoka in with that as well. We knew the defensive foundation of this team. We knew the ability to space the floor. We knew the ability with Fred VanVleet to limit turnovers, to not have CTE ball. We knew what the foundation was of a team that went 41-41 last year, and Alperen Sengun as one of the better low post big men in the NBA. Those were things we knew going into this year. And we hope that if Jalen Green would pick up where he left off in the final 40 games or so of last year, that you pair that with what we saw all year long from the culture guys, and this would be at least a winning team. And I think by and large, that's what happened. It's been a little bit of a slow start for Jalen, but he certainly gotten going over the last couple of months. I think where the clear difference is relative to last year is having a guy like Ime Thompson who makes the game so much easier for everyone else. As a starter, the Rockets are 9-2 with the men in the starting lineup. He's basically averaging like 17 points, 11 boards, 3 assists, 2 blocks, 2 steals as a starter. Those are ridiculously good numbers. At 21 years old in year 2, he's basically giving you Sean Marion level production, not as much from 3-point range, but even more from a playmaking standpoint. That in year 2 at 21 years old is phenomenal production. And that's the piece that we didn't know. We knew he'd be a good player going into this year. He's been better than that. And so I know it's not an Ime Thompson episode, but I just think when you look at how has this team taken a step forward, I think we knew the strengths going into this year, and that assuming they were healthy, they should win. I'd say, we predicted like 46, 47 wins going in. To me, the reason they're now tracking for low to mid 50s is because of Ime Thompson. He is giving you star level production already. And then you combine it with what we knew about this team with guys like Ime and Fred and Dillon and Sengun. That to me is the difference. And so for me, when I look at what we've actually learned in the big picture, Ime taking that leap this early, to me, that's the biggest reason why the Rockets, in terms of wins and losses, are where they are.
I fully agree, and I do think that the Rockets do have what it looks like the beginnings of truly a big 3, right? With Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Ime Thompson. And that's the trifecta that you build around moving forward. And it's going to be interesting to see how who they ultimately decide is best served filling those final 2 spots in the starting lineup in the years to come, right? Right now, it's Fred and it's Dillon playing alongside those 3, but TBD on whether it's Jabari or Tari filling one of those spots, or Reed Shepherd further down the line, what have you. Maybe Cam Whitmore's in there. Who knows? They have options ultimately, or maybe it's none of those guys, right? Maybe they go out and they still swing a trade for a star level player. But if Jalen Green is a true tier 1 guy, if Alperen Sengun continues to play like an all-star, if Ime Thompson continues to level up his performance, and they're able to swing, using all their Phoenix assets, they can go make a trade for a star level wing to maybe upgrade the Dillon Brooks slot on the roster, or go get another elite guard to pair with Jalen Green in the backcourt, and then slot Ime Thompson in on the wing. There's so many different permutations of where the Rockets can go with this roster, and a lot of it is only possible because of Jalen Green playing at the level that he's playing at now, and hopefully that sustains, and then as well as Ime Thompson's impact on this team.
Yeah, and I would also add what makes Ime uniquely valuable is that he can fit in a number of different constructs. It feels like there's basically been 2 iterations of the Rockets this year. You can basically split the first half in 2. So the first quadrant, let's call it, because we're talking about roughly 20 game stretches out of an 82 game season. The first 20 games, I would say that was defined by the Terror Twins. Ime largely coming off the bench. The Rockets were top 2 for a brief stretch, even number 1 in the NBA in defensive rating. And they just took over the game by wreaking havoc. The second stretch, the second quadrant, if you will, has been the Jalen Green takeover. And that's been at least half of that with Ime in the starting lineup as a forward. He's taken on a different role, and Tari hasn't been out there at all for majority of that 20-game second quadrant because of the injury. And so we've seen Ime used in a different way. And so to see 2 different variations of this team, how they play, and for Ime to provide value in both of them, that shows you just how much utility he has. I think, there's been a lot made of Ime perhaps unlocking the best version of Jalen. I mean, there's some truth in that, but I think it's more Ime unlocks the best version of everyone. He's just a really good basketball player, period, and he does so in a way that doesn't need a ton of touches. He defends at a high level, and so when you have a great player who's not high usage, that does the little things, that's unselfish, it makes the game easier for everyone. And so I think to start the year, we saw the faster pace, we saw the wreaking havoc of the Terror Twins, but then as the year has gone along and the pace has declined a little bit, they've become more half-court oriented, and Jalen Green started taking over. He fits in that construct as well. He fits in everything. And so I think having a Swiss Army knife type of player that can fit in a number of different configurations, that is just so valuable. And I think we were all hopeful going into this year that the men would be that level of player eventually. I did not know it would happen this quickly.
Shout out to a good friend of the program, Stanford KP, who likened the insertion of Ime Thompson to the starting lineup kind of to, a level of like Draymond Green-esque, right?
Yeah.
In what he does and unlocks for Jalen and Sengun. Obviously, Jalen and Sengun are incredibly talented in their own right and by themselves in a vacuum. But then when you add a piece like Ime Thompson, it just elevates the group as a whole. It's kind of like, again, when the Warriors swapped David Lee for Draymond Green, and then they really took off and became the Warriors that we, have unfortunately dealt with for the better part of the last decade. All right. So I fully agree with everything you put out there about Ime Thompson. I think one thing that I've learned and come to appreciate about this team is, yes, there have been frustrations with the offensive side of the basketball and some of the poor efficiency and the lack of outside shooting, everything. But I think one thing that we've learned is that this team has such an incredibly high floor just because of their culture and the defensive identity that they possess, right? They have made a living playing this scrappy, fight it out, get it out of the mud style of basketball, to where even on their worst nights, they're still competing at a high level with opposing teams, right? They're still able to go out there, and on any given night, they can rely on their defense. Even when they couldn't throw a rock into the ocean, they can rely on their defense to keep them in games and even flat out win them some games when the offense looks flat out ugly. And that was something that coming into this season, if you'll remember, we did our Rockets board bets earlier this season, and one of the questions I asked was, would the Rockets finish as a top 5 defense, or would they finish somewhere, 6 through 10 or 15 or what have you? And it was like less than 40% of people, I think, picked them finishing as a top 5 defense. And the Rockets came in and they doubled down on the top 10 defense that they had last year, and they became an even more elite defense, one of the best ones in the NBA this season. Yes, they've taken a little bit of a hit recently with the loss of Tari Eason, with the loss of Jabari Smith Jr. That's to be expected. I'm sure their defense will get back to that level once those two guys are both healthy and back in the rotation. Tari Eason being back for a couple games now will help offset some of that moving forward. But that's kind of been one of the lessons that I've learned about this team, is just it's very real, right? Like it doesn't feel like flash in the pan success. It's not like they just got hot for a stretch of games and they were able to bury their team, opponents in an avalanche of threes or something like that. This is sustainable success, and it's an identity that Ime Udoka has grown and cultivated since stepping foot in that Houston Rockets coach's office. I know we talked about kind of record and where this team is at. What else has surprised you about this team this season, Ben?
I would say just how quickly the offense has turned around. For me, it's easy to think back to that NBA Cup week, because that's when the Rockets were on national TV and getting talked about around the league. And that was basically just 1 month ago. And the conventional narrative was that this was a try-hard team, that they just didn't have the gear offensively to compete with better teams in the league. And of course, that was at a time in which, Jalen Green was starting to come around, but at the time he was largely doing it against lesser teams. Efficiency-wise, the 2 cup games, the knockout run games against the Warriors and the Thunder, he wasn't quite there yet. And so it felt like 2 months into the year, there was this perception of the Rockets that, hey, the culture's there, they're going to try hard, but they don't have the gear of the upper tier teams. Well, in January, they have the best offensive rating in the entire NBA. Now, are they going to be this good the rest of the way? Probably not. I think there's some hot shooting with this version of Jalen Green that's going to tail off a little bit. But even if they're just a top 10 type offense, which for the season as a whole, they are now, that combined with the culture, with the defense, once they're back to full health and you have Tari and Jabari both available, that should make this a very dangerous team come the playoffs. And so that surprised me a little bit, just how quickly it's turned. Even when the Rockets were struggling offensively in December, they pointed out that they weren't in the bottom 10. They were more middle of the pack. And Ime kept saying they were getting good shots. They trusted that eventually they would fall. And boy, have they. Obviously, Jalen's the headliner, but other guys have started picking it up as well. Cam Whitmore, someone we talked about a few minutes ago, his emergence has certainly helped them on offense. But I just think seeing this team go from a team that was largely mocked offensively as recently as a month ago to the number 1 offense in the league in January, to see it escalate that quickly has surprised me in a good way.
I think for me, one of the biggest surprises has been the next gear that Alperen Sengun has been able to get into defensively. We're going to be talking about Alperen Sengun in part 2 of our Rockets review series here, so be on the lookout for that coming up next. But I got to highlight just the fact that last season, playing under a defensive-minded head coach and Ime Udoka, right, there were concerns, right? Okay, can Sengun keep up? Can he maintain this level of defensive intensity? Can he not be a liability on that side of the floor? And I think he proved that last season. But then to become even better defensively this year, to be at the point where earlier at one point this season, right, he was being mentioned in conversations alongside Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren as like guys defending shots around the rim, right? He was better statistically, the advanced metrics favored him compared to guys like Jarrett Allen and Rudy Gobert and Evan Mobley. Alperen Sengun's numbers were that good at one point earlier this season. And maybe some of that's tapered off a little bit. I need to go back and dig up the numbers and revisit some of them, but his improvement on that side of the floor has been absolutely monumental, and it's been kind of the backbone of this Houston Rockets defense. The Rockets don't become one of the best defenses in the entire NBA without Sengun, who is their defensive anchor. He is the guy in the backline playing that backline defense, right? He's the guy rebounding the basketball. He's the guy calling out different coverages and guarding in the pick and roll and doing all these little things that help make the Rockets defense truly what it is. Now, is he solely responsible for it? Absolutely not. There are so many moving parts of a top tier NBA defense, but you cannot sit here and say with any level of sincerity that Alperen Sengun is either A, still a defensive liability, or B, that other guys are covering for him defensively, or this, that, and the other thing. No, he worked on his body in the offseason. He came into the season best shape of his career. He added so much upper body strength that it's really helped him continue to be physical on that side, to box out, to get good rebounds, to contest at the rim without fouling, all these different things that he's done in his game. I mean, just that sequence of defensive possessions against the Kings late in crunch time, right? The block on De'Aaron Fox, so the steals, the deflections, like so much so many insane performances throughout the year from him on the defensive side of the court. And that's the fact that we haven't even gotten into the offensive struggles he's been in, but I don't want to, we'll talk about that when we get to the next part. It's just, But
what I will say is that it dovetails so well with your earlier point about the floor of this team being significantly higher than we thought. Because even what we looked at going into this year as potential weaknesses for this team, such as Sengun with the defense, Jalen with the net 0 games offensively where he just makes no impact and Ime doesn't trust him enough because of Jalen's defensive limitations. Those have largely been taken away. Even the quote unquote bad games for Sengun or Jalen are not nearly to the level they were in their first 2 or 3 years in the league. And so because of that, the floor is so much higher. They can win in a number of different ways. And to me, that's what's so defining about this team. They've basically had just 2 games all season long that they have not had a chance to win in the fourth quarter. Ime postgame the other night, the most recent one at Toyota Center, he was asked to sum up this team entering the halfway point. And his contention was that even though I think at the time they had 12 losses, he thinks they should only have like 6 or 7, because he pointed to, some of the games they let slip away, fourth quarter execution. Obviously, the Minnesota collapse early in the year, they lost to some bad teams like the Hornets, the Blazers. But it's not just that they've had a lot of wins, and obviously the record on pace for 56 wins is very good. To be so competitive night in, night out, basically just 2 games all year, that Oklahoma City blowout at the very beginning of November, and then the Boston game earlier this month when you didn't have Ime, Jabari, or Tari. All 3 were out. Other than that, every game has at least been there for the taking in the fourth quarter. That's pretty rare in the NBA, to have the consistency of effort and focus to not have a clunker game where you say, you know what, it just wasn't our night. No, they are always fighting. They are always at least competitive. It speaks to how high the floor is for this team. It speaks to the culture, but I also think it speaks to guys that were supposed to be liabilities in certain areas going into this year, like Jalen and Sengun, at least based on reputation from their first 3 years. They have worked really hard to mitigate those liabilities to where they are much more manageable for the time being. And so I think that's been a big part of how the Rockets have raised their floor to a level where night in, night out, they compete with anybody.
We want to know your thoughts. We want your grades for Jalen, Jabari, Cam, and Ime Udoka. What have you learned about the Rockets this season? What have been the biggest surprises to you? Let us know in the YouTube comments. Ben, let everybody know where they can track you down at.
Yep, Ben DuBose, The Logger Line, The Rockets Wire on Twitter/X, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
But that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember to be on the lookout for part 2 of our Houston Rockets review series, where we talk about Alperen Sengun, Tari, Eason, Ime Thompson, Reed Shepherd, the Rockets MVP and most improved player through the midway point of the season, as well as expectations for the rest of this campaign. Be on the lookout for that. But remember, the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop a comment while you're there. Subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.